Testing. Secure your Elixir apps with Paraxial.io. From code analysis and bot defense to dependency checks, they've got you covered. Elixir first design with GitHub integration. Elevate your security at Paraxial.io. Hey, what's up? I'm Jacob Litzo, your Elixir Mentor, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Elixir Mentor Podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to Elixir, from interviews with enthusiasts, pioneers in the community, to innovative projects and libraries shaping Elixir's future. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Steve Bussey, author of Real-Time Phoenix and From Ruby to Elixir, who's here to share his experience building with Elixir. Welcome to the show, Steve. It's awesome having you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk Elixir with you.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I kind of want to just kind of hit things off with where you started, what kind of led you into software development, and what began that journey.
Yeah, so I'm fortunate that I think I started like enjoying programming in like 7th or 8th grade, which was like at the time one of the really popular things was like online text-based MMOs type things, like not like MUDs, but sort of like like MUDs in the browser, I guess maybe. And I was fortunate, like I just enjoyed playing them and stuff. And then like over time, that community was very open with the idea of like, all right, here's the source code of this game, or like people in the community be like, oh, you want to like know how to program, let's help with that, or like, hey, try building this thing, even though I had no idea what was going on. But it really like made me interested in programming, and the idea of like making the computer do something was really interesting to me, and like the puzzle solving aspect of it. And like through like high school, I kept programming and like getting better at programming and like actually knowing what was going on. And then I sort of accidentally went to school for programming. Like I didn't intend to, and it was like my second choice, I guess. And I ended up doing that. And I just felt like very fortunate because I actually like really love programming, and I love like working on it all day. And that's what I've been doing since I graduated, just like writing code and working on startups and, different phases of the startup journey.
That's awesome. I feel like it's funny. I tried to like programming when I was young and in college, and I hated my programming classes. I just like
most people do.
Yeah, it wouldn't click. I couldn't figure it out, and I ended up doing civil engineering. I was like, all right, well, I'm good at math. I'll just do something that doesn't involve programming.
That's what I would like. I wanted to go to school for civil engineering. And I was like, I wanted to go to the Coast Guard Academy, which has like a really low acceptance rate. And I was like, and I had like good grades and stuff, but like I didn't have a lot of the other stuff going for me that you probably needed to get into that like level of acceptance rate. And I just like procrastinated and I didn't apply to any other schools. And then finally, when I didn't get accepted, I was like, oh, I need to apply somewhere else, I guess. And I was like, well, the schools I wanted to go to were like, well, we're filled up a month and a half ago. So I ended up going like second choice. But I mean, I'm very happy with how it turned out. And I actually feel like lucky that it happened, but it was like totally accidental.
I feel like things usually they work out, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not the way you planned them. I was the same way. I was so lazy with applying to schools. I was like, it's such a pain. So
Yeah.
I just like picked the one I wanted to go to. Actually, I think I applied to 2, and I got accepted to both, luckily, because I feel like I was a very average student. I didn't want to overdo because I like to have fun. So I just like maintained my average. So like, all right, you got into programming. So I'm guessing you did like a CS degree. Is that what you did?
Yep. Yeah. I did a software engineering degree.
What kind of, now before you found Elixir, you were doing Ruby, right?
Yeah. So I started, my first like professional development job was PHP, like the old, like, WordPress, Joomla, like those types of CMS application development. And I first started Ruby in like when I went to my first SaaS company. So like I feel like Ruby wasn't really used like outside of like, it wasn't like PHP was what was used in that like CMS development space. And when I went to the SaaS world, I was like curious about Ruby, but I'd never used it. And then that job is where I got started with Ruby. And I was like, oh, I really like this. Like, this is like activated a new like level of programming for me. And I mean, I worked there for 8 years, and like it was awesome working at that company, and like that's where I also got into Elixir, and like, but like Ruby, like that's where I started Ruby development, and I mean, I still love Ruby. It's like a great language.
Yeah, I never learned Ruby, so I don't know much about it. And I like, let's see, like almost 10 years ago, I've been just in the startup space now for almost 10 years. And so you hear about Ruby on Rails, right? Because, you can develop quickly. You hear about all these unicorn startups that have used it. And I was always against it because I was like, I don't like the tightly coupled front end and back end. I thought it was a mistake. And now here I am, loving Live View, Phoenix, and Elixir,
Yeah.
And but my thoughts around that have changed drastically. I think just with a little more experience under my belt, because like I had Jose on for the 12th birthday of Elixir, and he made a good point. He's like, if you're refactoring something that much where your words, you're tightly coupled, you're probably rewriting it in a completely different stack anyways. So it doesn't matter if, your back end and front end are more tightly intertwined. And I kind of agree with that.
And I also think there's an aspect of like, as technology has evolved, like if you look at like the idea of, don't intertwine your front end and back end, like 10 years ago, like, there's arguments to be made for like why that's okay or not okay. And I think like technology is not the same. Like the languages like have developed features that didn't exist 10 years ago. And like the capabilities are totally different. And I just think that changes the equation a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. When you started working with Ruby, what kind of problems were you solving with it? What were you building?
Yeah, so this was at a company called SalesLoft. And so we built like sales software, like so software as a service, multi-tenant SaaS application. And it was Ruby on Rails backend with an Angular. This is like, 2014 Angular front end. And then we evolved to like React over time. React inside of Angular, but the Angular it's very hard to get rid of something like that when it's such a big product as it became.
Angular gets its claws in.
Yeah. I actually liked Angular, so I'm not an Angular hater, but like Angular V1, I even liked. I'm not too familiar with like the new Angular because I've been on React ever since then.
I've always been a fan of Angular myself too, because it's just the Angular way, right? It's not as open as React. You kind of know
that
you're
is
doing
true.
it right or wrong.
Yep. And people, and yeah, there were things that I didn't like about it, obviously, but it was like I actually liked building software in it. But yeah, it was Ruby on Rails backend, and I mean, like, what do I frame it as? Honestly, it's hard to frame it as anything other than like, to me, it's almost just like normal SaaS product, right? Which is like very like request based, very much like we did things in background and async and whatnot, but a lot of it was like, like requests to satisfy like an incoming request that came in, and writing records to the database, and like I just feel like it was very like, it wasn't like we were doing anything crazy. It was like very much like standard. Like if you looked at it, you'd be like, this is the like Ruby on Rails application way.
Okay.
Like very, very, very standard, and which was nice to develop in, because you, again, sort of like you said, like you had like, it felt like there was a path laid out, which was good for someone that was like new to Ruby, and having that path was actually very helpful for me.
Yeah. I feel that's probably why I don't have a bad taste in my mouth with Angular, is because I was very new when I was using it, and you kind of like to know you're doing things the right way.
Yeah, and same for me. Angular was the first like front end framework I'd used.
So the company you're at ended up adopting Elixir, or what sparked your interest in learning Elixir?
Yeah, so my coworker Ben, he had, I don't know, Hacker News, Reddit, something like that, right? He started seeing about Elixir and seeing about specifically about the real time capabilities and about Phoenix channels, and we were doing a little bit of stuff with telephony, like using Twilio and doing some stuff with that, right? But that was like we had some features we wanted to build that were going to be real time based on like phone, like people being on the phone, and like you need to react to things that are happening.
Mm.
And he was the first one to be like, hey, I think we should build this in Elixir. And it took a few months to like convince. I'd say it was like we spent like 6 months like talking about it, and like as like sort of like the top of the technology team, like figuring out, all right, like what would it look like to adopt this, and like making sure like the CTO was like on board with it. It helped that we are like there was already this like microservice concept, right? So it wasn't like we weren't having to invent like there was already something other than the monolith. So we weren't having to invent like, oh, let's do this and let's like start building something off of the monolith at the same time. We already had that pattern. So it's like, all right, instead of building a microservice in Ruby, let's build a microservice in Elixir. And he was the first one to like build that project. And then after that, it was like, all right, yeah, this is something we want to use for the team. And my teams and me in particular, I was very interested in programming in Elixir. And my team sort of picked that up as like, hey, everything like we're going to do is going to be Elixir from now on. So like basically from that point forward, we built like all the like internal frameworks that we used at the company. We built like a lot of the operations tools.
Oh, wait 1 second. I think something you dropped off on my.
I see my
There you are. Now you're
my
back.
megabits. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. I see my bit rate's back to normal now.
All right, cool.
I'll keep an eye on that. I now know like what I'm looking at there.
Right.
So yeah, we just like the team that I was on, we went full into Elixir. We built a lot of the frameworks and the tooling and the operations of it and like guiding it for the company. And our end goal was not ever like, hey, let's replace Ruby.
Yeah.
Because it's just like it was like not feasible. Like this was we had 100+ engineers. We had a SaaS application that was 6 years old. Like you just not like a rewrite was not what we were trying to do. It was more like, hey, let's give people an option that in this microservice world they can pick between Ruby or Elixir.
Yeah. I mean, changing something like a platform you've been building on for even just a couple of years, it's so hard.
It would have been impossible. Like I did some extractions out of the monolith for like some key features that were giving us performance problems in the monolith, and we're sort of bringing down the rest of the requests. And even those, like being very careful, focus on a single thing. Like it's very easy to introduce bugs or to have some type of issue get involved. And that was from like one feature out of 200. Like it just would have been. It would have been impossible. I mean, I think it literally would have been impossible to do that.
Yeah, probably. It's cool though when you see like a dev team at an established company pick up Elixir, because I feel like if you have a job and you can talk the core team into changing or adopting the technology, no one wants to go back once they start writing Elixir.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, the team that I was on, like once we started, people didn't really want to switch back, and we liked coding in Elixir.
Yeah, that was my problem. I had a buddy that told me for a couple years to learn Elixir, and then when I started on a personal project, I was like, dude, I don't want to write JavaScript ever again.
Yep, I feel that. That's why I write Elixir now, right? It's like and it's interesting as I think about like Ruby, right? Where I was like, all right, I love writing Ruby code. And even like I can find the like joy in programming no matter what I'm doing. Like I found ways, like when I was programming PHP, like this is like at the beginning of Laravel, and this was also like there's some other frameworks and stuff that I was like, I enjoyed coding in it. But Elixir is the first time where I'm like, all right, this has changed the way that I think about programming and the way that I'm like structuring programs and I just and the things I can do in it when I need to do them. Not that I'm not doing crazy stuff all the time. Actually, we have a very boring back end. But when I need to do crazy stuff, like I can do it. And it's just like I just enjoy programming in it so much.
Yeah. Well, I think 99% of projects have a boring back end, right?
Hopefully, right? Because it's it's like exciting to me is like means like risk and like I'm the one that has to solve the problem if it happens, being like the, the like top of the tech tree
Yeah.
basically. And like, I just want to like minimize risk. And
Right.
so actually boring to me is like a good thing.
Yeah.
Um,
And an exciting day is like optimizing a callback or something where you shave a millisecond off of a response or something.
yeah. Although at the phase we're at now, I'm not even worried about that. But at SalesLoft, that was a thing of like a lot of what I actually did for like a 1 to 2 year period was like optimizing performance problems that we had in the Ruby app. And it was actually nothing against Ruby. It's just like I think a lot of the things that we used to address have like since been solved.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly around like N+1s. It's like such a boring thing to have like tech problems for, but like we had so many problems with those because they just accidentally got added in over time. And now they have ways to solve that where that doesn't happen.
Can you explain that to me from being
Yeah.
not a Ruby guy?
Yeah. So, and that's actually a good point. Yeah. Cause it's not really a problem you have in the Elixir world. So one of the, I would say the most common, I'd be tempted to say that the most common backend performance problem that I saw and that I see people talk about is this idea of an M+1, which means, let's say you want to pull a list of records. All right, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be one query roughly to pull the list. Maybe you can do some stuff optimized and you maybe need a few more. But like let's say one query and you load 100 records. But now let's say you're loading a list of people and you also want to list the company name for the company that they're at. And that's a separate object or a separate table in the database. You know, intuition would tell you that the best way to do that is one query to get the people. Maybe you do a join, or maybe you do a second query to get the companies, but you're like one or two queries. And
Mm-hmm.
what can happen is, in very common in the older, like before like Ruby added or Ruby on Rails added protection for this, it'd be very common to forget to preload that company association. And you can still totally say person.company.name. And what it will do is it will go to the database and fetch that one company record. And so if you had a list of 100 things, you're going to get one query plus 100 queries. So that's where the N comes in, 100 records. And basically you're getting this like explosion of queries. And that was for us like one of the biggest performance problems that we had. And we had, obviously like inefficient queries and stuff like that would pop in over time, just from the characteristics of how the database was running would get tweaked, or queries would change and indexes and stuff like that. But the M+1s were like we're always hunting those, and we had I wrote tooling to like try to find them and fix them in test before it would happen in production. That was like and it had to be like coded specific to our app. Like there were already like gems that did that in the Ruby world. There's one called like Bullet, I think it was. But none of them worked for us for like the way our app was built. Like those tools didn't work. So I had to like build a custom thing for that.
So were N+1 queries just written on accident by like junior developers, or was it like a normal practice at first?
All over the place, right? And it can be like, would it be from junior or like I think it happened from anyone, like accidentally things happen. What the most common way that I would say would happen is you have this separation of query from like serialization of a resource. So turning that resource into JSON.
Gotcha.
And let's say like 6 months have passed, right? You like you haven't thought about this thing in 6 months. And you go and you're like, oh, hey, we want to add company to the person list. Oh, let me go to the serializer and let me add the company name to that serializer. You're like, great. Like feature built, everything's good, test pass, QA's passed, everything's happy, except you forgot to add that to the query. And now like you've just added an M+1, right? It's like very easy for it to happen. And they have that solved now by like disabling this feature in Ruby on Rails and in Active Record, where it won't automatically make that preload. It would raise an error instead of going to the database,
gotcha.
which is 100% the right thing to do. And so if you think of like Ecto, like it's just a different pattern where you don't have this like an Active Record, the pattern, not the library, but like this Active Record pattern is that you can have table access on the data entry itself. So you can say, person.company, and that will actually be an association across the table. And you could like automatically preload that through that association. Like that concept, it's like, well, why doesn't that exist in Ecto and in Elixir? It's like, well, it's like not really possible the same way in like a functional language. Like you could build it if you wanted to, like using like anonymous functions and stuff, but really you just don't have the same problem. Like the coding paradigm is a little different. And so like in Ecto, it's like you have to load your data. You have to preload
Right.
it, or you have to join it in or something like that. So it's just like that problem didn't exist. So like for us, like some of these things that were like very basic problems that we were having in our Ruby app that were causing performance issues, like they just went away when we switched to Elixir, because like that paradigm, it didn't exist as a problem. It's not like, oh, Elixir solved this. It's like, well, the problem can't really exist unless you go out of your way to make it exist.
Right. I like that. So what was your first like experience taking an Elixir app to production? Like, were you involved outside of just like writing microservices and
Oh yeah.
deployment and everything?
Yeah. I mean, I would say like me, and I'm thinking about like the first app I did was probably like me plus like one other person. And so I'd say like probably like 80% me and like 20% involved with another person. So it wasn't like a team at this point, right? Because we were like, hey, we're sort of spiking on this thing and seeing how it can go. And so we were expected to figure out like our ops team doesn't know what Elixir is, right? They don't know how to do it, right? But we had Kubernetes. We had the concept of take a Docker file and make a service that runs from it, right? But we had to figure out like, all right, the first thing we did was a real-time app. That was like one of the features that brought us into wanting to use Elixir. So we had to figure out like, hey, how do we network these nodes together in Kubernetes, right? Like we had to solve that problem, and we ended up having a pattern that we then applied to every project, basically. Like, how do we make, how do we get the cookie set properly in the node so they can talk, so they can actually connect to each other using the built-in networking? How do we make the WebSockets work correctly over this? Because we hadn't used WebSockets internally at that point. We were outsourcing it. How do we get our bug snag working? How do we get New Relic set up? How do we get Datadog set up? All these things. So it's like building the project was one thing. It's like half the battle, and then like getting it into production and like making people happy with it being in production, which means like the operations team is like, hey, I can see what's going on in the app. We have alerts and monitoring and all this stuff. That was another half of the battle for sure. It got easier over time, but like we had to figure that out. And I mean, I don't think I'm magic. Like I don't have like some like ability that's like greater than other people. I do have a very high tolerance for like banging my head against a wall, but it was like a lot of that was literally just like days at a time of like, how do I get this thing deployed and connected and all that? It's just like banging the head against the wall, and eventually you get it figured out and you're like, I don't have to think about that anymore. Like I have my
DevOps, that's how I do DevOps. I hack my way through, and it can be so frustrating, but once it's set up, you're happy. Wash your hands and move on, right?
Yep.
That's hilarious. All right. So Supered is you're a co-founder of and CTO, correct?
Yep.
And it's completely built in Elixir, correct?
Yep. Our backend's all Elixir, and then our front end is React.
Okay, gotcha. You want to tell us a little bit about Supered? I briefly started looking at it, and I actually think I'm already interested in your product because, I want you to kind of tell us about it.
Yeah. So we help people learn to use software and to enforce their processes. So we're really focused on sales teams and specifically teams in the HubSpot ecosystem. And basically like what we actually do from a product perspective is we help people, we allow people to define their process. Like, let's say you have a sales process that has, how do I get this deal from like prospecting to close deal? And we allow you to take that process, like create the documentation for it. And then we actually put that documentation back into the web page itself. So we do a lot with like Chrome extensions where we're like injecting content into a page. And so basically, we allow you to define this process. And then like, let's say one of your things is like deal created, prospect scheduled, like all these different phases. You'd be able to put and attach that documentation directly to that phase. So any salesperson that comes in, they're not researching or they're not going outside the platform. They just click a button and then boom, it pops up and it tells them exactly what they need to worry about or what they need to think about. That's like one of the things we do. And then you take that concept to like different levels where you say, all right, we're actually going to, instead of just having documentation, we're going to have step-by-step walkthroughs where we show you what to click around the application. So we're like going to record a flow and then play it back for these users. Or we're going to do things now for the service companies, for the consultants, so that they can apply this to their customers and to their business, and they can actually like drive adoption of HubSpot for their clients. And so there's a lot. Like if you looked at the website, you're probably like, I still don't really know what they do, because there's like a lot going on with the product. And basically like our sort of hypothesis is that adoption and like adopting a piece of software has so many parts to it, and like it's a process that needs to be managed. And so like our product sort of reflects that. And like we go wide, we do a lot of different things, but they're all in this vein of like adopting different software.
Yeah. So my sales, what should I say? My sales flow, like with CRMs and stuff, is very pathetic. And I've actually, I tried to use HubSpot and I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, it sounds like Supered would help me.
So it may not help you not hate it.
Yeah.
and what it helps you do is, let's say that and it's really a problem that you get as you start getting into like scaling a team up and adding more people into a product. But it's like let's say someone at a company, like whether it's like, let's say it's a small company, it's probably like the co-founder or like someone that's like in charge of like the revenue function at that company. They're creating a process that they want their team to follow. Like the honest truth about like sales is like, I just want to sell this deal. Get out of my way, right? It's like the CRM is not actually to help you close a deal. The CRM is to help enforce a process of how we want deals to be closed, because we think that when you do this, you'll be more likely to close the deal, even though you think that you won't be.
Gotcha.
And
so it's good for
it helps with
having a process when you're growing like a sales team.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. A lot of people reach out to us. They're like, oh, I'm looking at adopting HubSpot. Can you help with that? And it's like probably actually not. Like, we're probably more for someone who is already someone at the company has already adopted HubSpot and like has a process that they want. And now they want to distribute that process to their like team.
Gotcha. All right. Good to know. I'm in the middle of growing a sales team.
Okay.
I think I found a superhero, so it's good.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so I'm going to keep Supered in mind because, we're in the middle of figuring out our process right now and how we bring in new clients. And I hate it. I love programming so much more. And then when when you decide to be an entrepreneur, I don't know if I really like the word entrepreneur, but when you have to start running a company and managing, and then, doing sales, and you're responsible for bringing in money, you miss programming a lot. Like, I feel like I only get to program like, I don't know, 20% of my day now, if I'm lucky. But yeah,
that's unfortunately true for me too. I think and I'm not doing like sales stuff. I have a great co-founder that I love working with, and he's really good on the sales side. Which is definitely very, very gracious for that. But even then, just like the act of like all the stuff that has to happen, right? It's like, it just ends up taking a lot of time in the day. And it's like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want to get this thing done. And I feel like it's like, it should take me a day, but it's taking me like the whole week. And I'm just like, I just don't have time.
I know.
It just is what it is.
Yep. And days go too fast. So when you started architecting and figuring out Supered, what made you want to go with Elixir?
Yeah. So part of it is because that's what I like doing. However, actually a big aspect of this for me is like, I sort of alluded to it earlier where I was like, I have to deal with problems. What I specifically mean with that is like, let's use the term, like I wear the pager, right? Like I deal with, I run our support function, which is a little unusual that like for like the ARR that we have, that I single-handedly run the support function. And I am like responsible for any like, if there was ever like a platform problem, like I'm going to be the one fixing that. And so I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want there to be those problems. I want to like minimize bugs. I want to minimize like any type of like downtime event. And so for me, I know with like my Elixir stack that like performance problems are probably not going to be a big deal for the way that cause I've been writing Elixir now for like probably like 7 or 8 years. And like, I know that the way I'm building an app, I'm not going to have these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't. So it's like, we've had like, hopefully, like, knock on wood here, like, as I say, but it's like, I mean, we have thousands of users and we've had like 0 downtime events.
That's
ever.
awesome. Yeah.
It's been like multiple years now. And like, we've had things happen, right? I'm just like thinking like, we've had our database get slammed by like poor architecture decisions. And then we have to go fix a quick little problem. But it's like, and like that, once your database gets slammed, your app is going to slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But like, we've never had like the app go down, or we've never had like our servers run into like just getting demolished by like requests. So that's part of it. And then the other part is just like, I actually really like the tooling in Elixir apps. And so for me, like, what that looks like, our backend is Absinthe, GraphQL, request-based APIs. We use React because we do a lot with the Chrome extension, to the point where it's like we would not be able to use live view just because it's like the things we're doing in the page, like we have to actually like just like be in the page for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for like things like code reuse and whatnot, like we use React. So like our backend, like I said, it's pretty boring, but like I actually think that Absinthe GraphQL implementation is one of the best GraphQL implementations in any programming language. Like I think it's like arguably, I think it's better than like the Node like native GraphQL implementation.
That's amazing. I haven't used GraphQL since my Node days. Maybe I have to check it out in Elixir.
Yeah, I mean, I just like it. I feel like a lot of the problems that people say that they have with it, I'm like, I mean, it's not really a problem. I think it's sort of solved over here. So I just, because of that was another one of the big reasons of like, well, that
I
really
like the
that.
freedom that GraphQL gives your developers, at least like when you're in development, right? Creating new features and things, you can kind of invent your queries.
Yeah, and some of that, like, I don't actually think we even do much of that, to be honest. I think like when I say boring, it's like it's like it is very boring. But like I think the big thing for me is, and this is like one of the things, because I have a development team like I work with, and they've done a little bit with GraphQL, but like not a ton. I have more experience with that, but sometimes we'll have a problem, and like typically we would solve this in a different way. And versus being like, oh, we can just like change the GraphQL resolver. Like we can write a resolver function for this one field. We can even batch it if we want to, if it's like a database related thing. And we can actually like focus on that as a concept, rather than, oh, we need to change every place where we're querying this data. Yeah. Which is like a pretty daunting task, because it's like very easy to miss things. And so it's like, oh, we're actually like we'll solve a problem differently in GraphQL than we would in our like, the previous ways that we're used to writing code. Yeah. And I've worked with both of them before, so it's like we have a little bit of a shared foundation with some of it.
Nice. Yeah, refactoring large amounts of like CRUD operations is such a pain. I implemented a framework that is a little too leached into my whole platform, and the decision was made this morning that I'm going to be ripping it out. And it's going to be a nightmare. I'm not going to bash the framework. It's just it's not working for the speed of my development. It's like slowing me down. When you're just used to, your normal good old Elixir environment, Ecto and all that stuff. Yeah. It just started slowing me down on too many things I knew how to do without the framework. But now removing it is going to be a daunting task.
Yeah, I feel that. That's why, like, I think especially for like startups, like there's something to be said about what you're familiar with, as long as it's going to do the task. But it's just like, because there's so much other, it's like so much work goes into just like getting customers, keeping them happy, like all that. It's like, all right, like I'd almost rather like over-index on that rather than like making the technology like do something new or do something I haven't done before. Yeah. I'm almost like, I mean, there's a phase for that. Like as you start getting into like bigger problems and you like have a like larger code base, but it's like that's almost like a different phase of a company.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why for like startup people, I'm like, if they're like, should I use Elixir for my startup? I'm like, do you know Elixir? It's like, if like, no, I'm used to like Ruby, or I use Node, I use PHP. I don't even like, it's like, probably shouldn't use Elixir. Like you should probably use what you're comfortable with, because making the product so that you can sell it is the most important thing.
There's something to be said with speed, especially in your MVP stage, right?
Oh yeah.
Or like now, like my dev shop, we're a small agency, right? And speed matters, especially when I'm wearing multiple hats and have to, like, I only get 20% of my day to code. If it takes me that whole time to figure out how to do a simple query, like that's not a good use of my time,
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah.
And I'm so like we picked Elixir, or I picked Elixir. Like I think it's turned out really well for us. I mean, it's just like I don't have any regrets. Even like at the point now where I'm like, there's not really anything I would change. There's some things I thought about over time where I'm like, oh, could this help me increase some speed a little bit, or like make things a little bit cleaner? And it's just be like, maybe, but it's also like adding a lot of risk, and sort of like what you said of like you add something in, and then I think a lot about, am I going to have to take this out in the future, and what will that be like? And sometimes I'll be like, I really want to add this in, but I know that taking it out is going to be so hard that I don't know that if I add it in, I'll ever be able to take it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when something gets entrenched. I'm just like, part of me then is like, I'm not going to add it in.
Yeah.
That's why it's very boring.
Luckily, I'm like early enough in my platform where I'm not affecting a ton of users.
Yeah.
But if it was a year down the road, I probably would have to just leave it in and
just live with it.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious, how many Elixir engineers do you have on your team?
There's myself and 2 other people.
Okay. See, that's what's nice. Like, that's what's nice with Elixir too. I feel like you move quickly and you can keep your engineering team relatively small.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that is true. We also have, I believe, a above average capability dev team. So like both the people that are on the team I've worked with for a number of years, and I'm like, all right, these guys are very good at what they do. And I basically spent my whole, like, everything up until this point, I've basically been going with the idea of like, I want to have all the skill sets that are needed, like front end, back end, like some light design chops, the operation chops, so that if needed, I could run like a product by myself. And that's how we did that for a year. I think we hired our first engineer at like 750K ARR, right? So it's like we had a like decent user base by the time we even hired our first engineer.
Yeah.
And so I agree with what you're saying. I do think though, like we have a good dev team, which makes me happy.
Good dev
I'm very
teams are
lucky
important
to work with them. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like if you allow yourself to you don't want to grow your dev team too quickly, because I feel like you have a quality problem then, right? Because you can't vet your engineers, and it's nice when you can slowly grow your dev team, even if you have to take on more stress for a short period of time.
Yep.
But when you can evaluate and hire engineers that you know or may have worked with in the past, it's a lot better than just throwing out like, hey, we're hiring, and then going through 100 interviews.
Yep. And there's something to be said about like, hey, how do people get started in the first place? Like there's an aspect to that. Early startup, I'm like, actually my next hire probably would be more in a like, I don't know if going outside the network, but like maybe a different approach than what I've taken with these, like with the current engineering team. So
yeah, well, like beginning startup, it's important just to know people, right? You kind of get your core team together, and then when you start to grow, obviously you have to get an interview process.
Yep. And part of that is like one of the frameworks is like forming, storming, norming, performing. That's like what the framework is, right? And so it's like every team goes through that, right? And especially so it's like if you're bringing in a team that you've already worked with, you've actually done some of that like forming, storming phase in the past, and you might have been at the performing phase, right, with this team. And so that doesn't go away even like as you move into a different context, right? It's like that team is performing. And so I think that's very effective for startup hiring.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love that. What lessons have you learned building Supered, like with Elixir? Is there anything that you would avoid, or did it go relatively smoothly?
I think it's I think it's gone relatively smoothly. I think we're lucky in that like I think we've had more success than we should have for like the phase that we're at, which is like I feel like we got lucky on some respects, which
That's
makes
awesome.
other things easier.
Yeah.
Like I don't look at what we're doing and I'm like, oh, I do not think I could replicate what we've done. Like I think we're doing good, which makes some of the tech stuff easier because like it's almost like we've like picked a direction and we're able to like go down it. We don't have to be like, oh, hard pivot and do something else, right? Which is just so disruptive. So like there's something to be said about that. However, if I think about like, all right, lessons for Elixir specifically, I think there's something to be said about like the boring things that work well that I appreciate. And that like a lesson is like using GraphQL, using like React, like you'd be like, all right, that's like the 2020, the 2018 way of doing development, right? And I'm like, should I be using LiveView? Should I be looking at these other things? I'm like, we could, and I did a startup with LiveView as well. But there is something to be said about like the boring technology that works really well in Elixir. And it's like it's still there, it's still growing, it's still evolving, it's still getting like new capabilities. And we don't see it as much sometimes in the community because we're focused on a lot of new things that are coming through that are awesome. Like the new stuff is awesome, but there's something to be said about the sort of like old stable things that are still working really well. It's like I don't regret building that for our like using those tools for our foundation of our app. I think just thinking about different things.
Did you have to take any like creative approaches that you wouldn't have had to think about using like an object-oriented language or?
Honestly, not really, to be honest. Like I'm like when I say boring, I'm like our backend is very boring, right? It's like if I search for like the word gen server, like it probably doesn't exist in our backend, right? Because it's like we just like it's not like, oh, we just have this like simple CRUD app. Like it's not like that. But it's just like
But it's a typical REST API for the most part.
Yeah, like that GraphQL, but it's like the same concepts apply across.
Yeah.
But I think if I think about like one of the things that has caused me like pain, it's not anything about Elixir. It's actually about like the multi-tenancy of a SaaS application. And I'm very used to. So I think one of the requirements of like a I say like ethical responsibility, like because you're like protecting people's data, is like you have to have a good approach for like multi-tenancy. For me, what that means is like hard barriers drawn. I do some stuff in code with some like libraries I wrote to help with that, like at query level. But like you have to have these barriers. But one of the challenges that we faced is as we actually go to serve consultants, they actually don't exist in always this just like single tenant world, right? Because they're working with their clients. They're bringing clients in, they're managing their accounts, they're helping them get stuff set up, they're like interacting with this. And that has like making code work when you design code for like a single tenant inside of a multi-tenant SaaS application. Now starting to even add like a little bit of cross tenancy has caught like that has been actually one of the biggest like pain points in terms of development. Because you still have to do things responsibly. Like you have to put in the right protections, but now you're also like opening up the idea of like if I'm looking at analytics, should I actually have analytics for my clients as well? Like going cross tenant. That's been I probably would have thought about that differently from the beginning, knowing what I know now.
Yeah, so like my hosting platform's multi-tenancy, right? And then from an agency level, we can see, all the tenants' databases, but then you have to lock down, like I'm adding an e-commerce feature. So I have to think about that now because now we have tenants with inventory, payment things, and all these other things that you cannot let that data ever leak. So I feel like we have probably a lot in common with that aspect of our products.
For me, like, and we're doing this, so it's like not necessarily a lesson, but I think it's been like reinforced is there's different frameworks that have this built in. I actually think like Ash has this built in sort of a cool way with like the multi-tenancy. But a lot of times it's like up to you as a developer to like go and implement that.
Mm-hmm.
I do it at the query level. Like I don't do multi-schemas or anything like that. I think that's sort of a pain. But I have a library that I wrote. I don't even ecto tenancy enforcer or something like that. I think only I use it and the company I used to work at. But basically it's like it will yell at me.
Is it on GitHub?
Oh yeah. It's a real library.
I want to check it out.
Ecto tenancy enforcer, I think is what I called it. Very creative naming. Yep. So basically, like I put this into my code, and it's like it's like you put it into the repo, and the repo has like a handy function that allows you to like hook into every single query that's made, and it will basically crawl that query, making sure that you've set up the tenant in the proper way. So like making sure like you have a where with a tenant on it, and that all joins are associated to the tenant as well, either directly or via like specifying the ID of the tenant manually. And so like we don't have like we've never had a cross tenancy issue because every single one of our queries runs through this.
Okay.
However, then sometimes we want to go outside this and say, all right, well, this agency needs to have some cross tenancy stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to like undo it and like add in our own protections. But like having this in place has from the beginning, like made it a lot quicker to actually develop the multi-tenant SaaS application. Cause I'm not even having to think about it necessarily. Like obviously I need to think about it, but I know that it's enforced.
I'm going to check this out because I'm ripping out something that I'm using for multi-tenancy right now because I like it at the query level as well. And I just think like that's a big benefit of using like Postgres and, other relational databases. So
the operations of it at the query level are just so much easier than pretty much any other option. And it's like fine if you're like, oh, I have 10 customers and I'm using like custom schemas. It's like, okay, you can make that work. But if you're like, oh, I have 6,000. Right. Now it's like, oh, you want to do a database update, and it's like it's just such a pain. So
I agree. Yeah, it's better to be at the lowest level kind of that you can be at, right?
Yeah, but you add risk because you're like, oh, if I mess this query up, if I don't put this tenancy or I do it wrong, it's like now I've like leaked data, and okay, now I have to figure that out.
Yeah, you don't want to leak data.
Yeah. Like the one thing you have to tell people about, right? It's like you can make a lot of mistakes and be like, it didn't affect anyone. Like this was like a mistake that affected us and made something painful for us. But as soon as it's like someone's data is like seen by someone else, now you're like,
leaked data,
I got to tell
finances.
you about that. Yeah. It's like, that's, I have things in a contract that say I have to tell you about that. And so you just never want to have to do that. It's like never a combo you want to have.
Knock on wood. I've never had to do that.
Yeah. I think I have not either. Luckily.
I know a lot of like I've had good buddies that have started startups that just didn't have good data architecture. Like they used things like Firebase and things like that, and they had very like huge data leaks across clients and tenants, I guess you would say it. But it's because they, when you try to create like a multi-tenancy SaaS app without multi-tenancy, it's
hard to add in. Yeah, it's hard to add in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I just think about like lessons. That's just like things that's been reinforced. I haven't had we just realistically haven't had anything like a lot of time I think the best learnings are like through pain. Like a lot of the database stuff I know is from like juicing performance out of a system that was like that needed it, right? And like I learned so much from that. But it's like we just haven't had yet. Like I actually hope to have the type of problems that like you really learn from, but like we haven't had those yet where it's like, oh, some big revelation has happened, which is both good and bad because I do like learning things, and I think a lot of like the book, like the first book I wrote, like Real Time Phoenix, is like written out of like real world pain. Like it was like my response to like very like painful rollout of a system, and so it's like you learn a lot in those environments, but also maybe it's like good that it doesn't happen sometimes because you're
Yeah.
like, well, like it's usually bad when like it's usually because something bad happened.
Yeah, I mean that's why I started Elixir Mentor, because I feel like I went through 3 years of pain, like learning Elixir, coming from like object oriented JavaScript world. Like I tried to force so many like mutable aspects into a functional
Mm.
paradigm, and I rewrote my code base at least 3 times when I was like, oh, I did this completely wrong.
Yep. I feel that's a great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
So things out of, and actually like when I first started in, like when I left, I was more like a mechanical engineer doing automation. And then I got into the startup world and I accelerated like pretty quickly in the startup that I joined. So I
Mhm.
got like responsibility faster than I should have.
Yeah, I feel
And
that.
I started like being a API like backend engineer when I was only iOS before.
Okay.
And then I learned about man in the middle attacks and things like this. And I
Mm.
was like, just, you know, I was putting too much data over requests and just like being naive, right? And then our product got a little man in the middle attack and we lost a bunch of like paywall stuff to,
Mm.
little, I can't really call them hackers. It's just like they were using like Charles proxy or something,
Yep.
and then I learned that, you can't trust. You have to control. You have to control your requests back and forth and keep everything you can on the back end. And it was a big learning experience because it happened like probably my first 2 years of becoming a software developer.
Mm. Yep. That's
But
you learn a lot from it though.
you do, yeah. And then I got paranoid on security. Probably went over the top, right? But it was
Yep.
it was probably a good thing. Let's circle, I guess not really circle back, but let's talk about, you just had a new book this year, right? Ruby,
Yeah, I got it right
from
here.
Ruby to Elixir. Nice. I love the cover too, the origami. That's cool.
Yeah. I'll say this because not to, it's just sort of funny how stuff works out, right? What they don't show you from this was there was a crumpled ball of paper here, and that was like the first cover that came to me, and I was like, Ruby's not a crumpled ball of paper. I cannot put that on the cover. So it's like this like origami concept was. I was like, a boat's a good thing. Like we can have a boat over there. That's good. All right, but Elixir's a flying hummingbird. Okay, we got that.
Yeah, that's funny. Um, what inspired you to write a book specifically for like Ruby to Elixir developers?
Yeah. So part of it is like it was my journey, and so I wanted to like capture some of that. Um, I I'm just thinking like I feel like things are born out of like often like my first book was born out of like the pain of like building a real-time system. Um this was a little different because like I started writing this book after my like previous startup failed badly. And I was just like, I was like, I feel like I write books at like transformative times. Um and that was it was like a different reason for writing the book. But I was like, I think that there's a need for people that were like me that came in from this other language to like have concepts that they're familiar with mapped to the Elixir concept so that they can like comparing an object in a gen server, right? Something like very like specific and like, all right, let's like go through that and like and think about it. And um and then part of it too was like, let's call it like the pipeline of like people coming into Elixir. A lot of it is through the Ruby ecosystem, and
Hmm.
like I'm not actually trying to like turn Rubyists into Elixirs. Like I actually think that's like some people view it that way, like a adversarial thing. It's not that way for me. Which is why I didn't put a crumpled ball of paper on it, right? It's like
You're too
proof that I
nice
don't feel
to.
that way, right? But it's like uh I think, people just want to have more options. And then if you have a better product, like a better language, like people will stick with it because they enjoy it.
Hmm.
And I think it's like it changed the way I program and the way I think about programming. And so I'm like, I think that, I want to introduce that to other people.
Yeah, I
Um,
like that. I think
yeah.
just learning the functional paradigm and the immutability, it makes you a better programmer, even if you even if your day job is object oriented programming,
Yep.
JavaScript, like you're gonna write better code having that
Yeah.
mentality, because it kind of it forces you to write a function that only does one thing, and like you
Yeah.
transform, right?
Yep.
Versus
Yeah. And when I first started, it was like, because the first app that I wrote was like, I would call, like, we had like some internal data structures that represented specific things that we wanted to keep like real time and keep in memory and whatnot. So it wasn't just like a flat database record. It was like a little bit different than that. And we were like updating it as events came in. And then you could always like query for, hey, give me the current status of this this piece of data. And I struggled so much with like the functional transformation. It's like, hey, I was a good programmer coming into that. And I just remember like that code was bad. Like if I looked at that code now, I'd probably be like, ooh, that's bad. I mean, it worked, but it was bad. And so it did change like over time, like the way that I thought about that, like the problem of like transforming data changed significantly. And like
dude,
from I think about like the first app I wrote, I was like,
yeah, no, I was the same way. And like I was remembering, like before I understood pattern matching, I was like, what are these arguments? Like, I don't know what is going on here. Like,
yeah,
and I like did not grasp it. And then the day it clicked, I was like, this is like the most magical thing I've ever learned.
yep, I feel that.
Yeah.
And like so, like I had false starts when I came in when I was learning Elixir, right? So it's not like I picked up one day and I'm like, now I've learned Elixir and I'm gonna go and use it, right? It was like I just struggled, and I had someone to talk to. Like I had a mentor through it, luckily. The colleague who like wanted to introduce Elixir, he had spent a lot of time like going through similar things as me, and he was farther in the journey. And so I remember like it just some stuff didn't click, and I was over indexed on like learning OTP and learning like gen servers and stuff, and it's like I probably didn't necessarily need to worry about that yet. Um, and it added a lot of confusion for me. So it's like
Yeah,
it took
I
me like
didn't.
3 or 4 times of like doing some like I would say like 2 to 3 month like learning processes, and it took like and then I'd like be like, I don't really get it. Like let me sort
Yeah.
of like restart. Let me restart. And then
Yeah.
once I got it, I was like, okay, I now I get it. However,
Mhm.
like it took me a little bit to get there.
Yeah, I didn't even start flexing the OTP side of things in Gen servers. Like you're saying that you have a really simple backend, right, written in Elixir.
Hmm.
My first project was so basic. It was essentially just a REST API
Mm,
written in Elixir, and I didn't do anything with
yep.
OTP, Gen servers, or anything. But I'm kind of like
That's a
mostly
good thing.
because, yeah, I think like I knew all the hype around it, but I didn't have time to like figure it out. And I was like, I'll figure it out when I need to, like
Yeah.
when I stumble upon a feature. Okay, now it's time to learn what a Gen server was.
Hmm.
And then I think it was good because if I would have learned or tried to learn Gen servers too soon, I think I would have overused them
Mm,
for keeping state and like the mutability side of things, right? I would have this global
yep.
state accessible from everywhere. So I think I would have approached learning an immutable language the wrong way.
Yeah, and I almost view them as like tools for performance. Like because once you can start doing things in memory, I mean the performance difference of like in memory versus making a lot of like you can just
Oh
really get some
yeah.
performance gains. So that's one aspect. Or for like very specific multi-step like complicated workflows that like maybe involve other systems or things like that. I think like gen servers can come in use there. That's like almost like the two tools that I use them for. Now, that's because I'm building on frameworks that use gen servers really well, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like Oben and like Phoenix and like Phoenix channels, which live views build on Phoenix channels, then like they use OTP really well, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like they're going to use live view or sorry, they're going to use OTP and processes 100 times better than a new Elixir is, right? So it's
Yep.
like it's almost better to like start by using those frameworks and getting the benefit of how they're using it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then over time, find that you need to add things, performance or the real time stuff. You start needing to do a little bit of different programming sometimes. And then you add them in, but it's like, you might be 2 years into your journey before you even like actually
Yeah.
start doing that in production. Versus like
Yeah.
when I started programming, I was like, I'm going to build an SMTP trap, right? I'm going to like start like a Gen TCP socket, and I'm going to listen for requests, and I'm going to like process those, and I'm going to update the state that's like the SMTP messaging, and I'm going to respond to the request. It's like very like useful, problem to solve if you're learning OTP, but it's like if you don't even know Elixir yet, it's like very hard to then grasp everything and put it all together.
Yeah, I'm excited to start using Oben. I just had Parker and Shannon on last week, and
I saw that.
They're awesome.
They're awesome.
They're fun to talk to, and yeah, I just think Oben, you don't have to reinvent a tire. Like they have the scheduler down, and all the things.
And it's like everyone, like you should default to that, and it's like I used to be a little bit of I was a little hesitant when I first started, because at my previous job, we were probably processing like 150 to 250,000 jobs per minute, like a ton of job throughput. Mm-hmm. And so and that was all based on Redis. And I was a little skeptical about like Postgres versus like Redis for the job backend. And like at this point, having used it for the past like 5 years, basically, I'm like, don't try to reinvent that wheel. It's just like, unless you're like literally like I've used it and I've like hit the edges of what I can what I can do, but it's like 99.99% of people, that's not going to be a problem. It's like just use it. It's like it's really well built.
Well, because I found myself trying to write my own like cron jobs essentially, and like, why am I going through the hassle of this when there's literally a tool that is optimized to work well?
Yep. And it handles things like if your servers, if you do a restart over the cron period,
failures or anything. And like, how hard that would be to write from scratch. Like you would just have lost tasks that you don't know if they fired or not.
Yep.
So I'm excited to start using it. I think it'll make my life a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, those two they're pretty entertaining. I don't know if you did you watch?
I haven't watched it yet, but I saw like some clips of it. I think like I haven't ever been I don't think I've ever like had like an extended conversation with them, but it's just like I think they have like I've seen like talks, and I've seen like things that they do, and I really like enjoy their like perspective and their approach to things, and like and just like how they're approaching Oben and like trying to build something that's like in like this community. Like I think it's really awesome, and I've never seen anything that makes me like doubt it. I'm like, you all seem like you're doing a really good job with this.
Yeah. No, they're really cool. What made you like your overall project? I believe I feel like I get why you chose Ruby, right? Because it's your background and it's the popular cycle of Ruby developers coming to Elixir. But it almost could have been like object oriented. It could have been more generic.
This is one of my regrets. I'll be honest, like this is one of my regrets. Because in reality, percentage wise, maybe 3% is relevant to like actual Ruby, right? Because it's like when you're teaching the concept, you're not like, it's not like every sentence is relating back to Ruby. It's like like you might start a section with a Ruby concept, and then we're gonna like map it into Elixir, and then you have 3 pages afterwards, right? So it's like a paragraph goes to then 3 pages, and then you're not talking about Ruby throughout that. And so it's like when I actually look at it, I'm like, my concern is that because a part of it was like the marketing perspective of like, from Ruby to Elixir is like a powerful statement, I think. But it's like, does it actually scare people off who's like, oh, I'm a JavaScript developer, it's not really for me. And I'm like, in reality, like
it kind
you could not know what Ruby is, and it doesn't matter. It like literally just doesn't matter. And it's actually it's more about how I learn languages and how I learn like programming, where I'm like, all right, and the first book is the same way. And like I think people like this style, and I'm not saying everyone has to write this way, but like the way I write is like I'm gonna have like the first 5 chapters, like the first half of the book, be like deep on like we're learning the concept. Like the first chapters are all about like learning Elixir, learning like learning the language versus learning like a little bit of OTP stuff, and it's all about like and like data manipulation and pattern matching. So it's all about like using Elixir. There's no Phoenix, there's nothing like that. And then the second part,
like what I kind of get from it, which I'm going to read it because I think it'll be good. But it's kind of just shifting your way of thinking from like an object-oriented or mutable language paradigm into adopting a functional language, kind of, right?
Yeah, and for me, like the way I think though is like it's almost like phase one classroom, phase two project,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of books. I'm not saying it's a bad approach. For me, it doesn't work as well. Is like a single project that goes like throughout the whole book, and it's almost like, hey, I need like a lot of small examples in the beginning, and then I need like the one big example that's going to like take it
Yeah,
through and
yeah.
like teach me then the tools. So it's like the way this book is structured is like learn Elixir in the first half and then learning tools in the second half. So you like learn Phoenix, learn Ecto, learn Oben. I don't even remember. There's like 4 different things you're learning in here,
Yeah.
right? And it's like uh, that has nothing to do with Ruby at a point. It's more of like how I structured the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I I uh, I do think that I could like rebrand this and remove the Ruby aspect, and I think it would be more successful. But it's not about like success or like how many I'm not like optimizing for sales. I'm more of like optimizing for like, hey, this is my journey. This is like authentic. Like this book is me as I'm learning Elixir and
Yeah.
like reflecting back on it. And so
Well,
that is an aspect of it.
I love the style where, especially if it's the first book you pick up for learning Elixir, right? Like I do think you need the classroom style because you need to understand the basics. You need to know what, the pipe operator is, how binding works, how pattern matching works. You need to know all those things before you can write any code.
Yep.
So I feel like that's good. Start the book with, your Elixir basics and then move into a project. Because I do
Yep.
think project-based learning is the best way to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with that.
Yeah, I love that. What made you want to choose an SMS application?
Yeah. So I would say like thematically through my career, one of the things that has been a big benefit is knowing how to use Twilio. And this book was originally focused on like actually using Twilio. Like, hey, we're actually going to send real SMS messages to your phone. And I made it all compatible with Twilio, but there's actually like regulation in the US now that make it not possible to write that into a book because you can't just start using Twilio's API anymore. You can't just start sending SMSs. You have to do like government verification and all that. And it's like,
Mm,
so it's like, I like let's take SalesLoft, right? So sales application. It's like I introduced Twilio there, like because I had used it at a previous job, and it's like over time, I would say it would not have been the app it was if we didn't have that functionality, and it actually like unlocked a lot for us as a company, and it was because I knew how to use Twilio. I mean, I'm not saying we wouldn't have figured something out, but like, so like, I just really want to give people this experience of like, this product is really cool. Like, you can actually build really interesting things for businesses when you start looping in like phone stuff, not SMS specifically, but even like phone calls,
mm-hmm.
like these like communication systems. And so a little bit of it was like, hey, this is like almost like an homage or like, um, I'm gonna like dip your toe into this without you realizing it, and I hope that like maybe for some people like they take it one day and they're like, oh, I need to send some SMS messages. I remember doing something with that before. Let me check this out. I know. Oh, I already know how to do it. Oh, I already have done this type of thing before. Um, so that's where it came from. Is it the best choice? Probably not. But
But
like,
it's fun.
but it's fun, and it's like it was
Yeah.
more fun. Like I had the whole book, like I had the whole example written. And it was like more fun because it was actually sending you SMS messages to
Yeah.
your phone. And then I procrastinated and I didn't write anything for like 2 months. And I came back to it and I was like, all right, time to start writing the next chapter. Let me make sure all my code's working. And it was like, it doesn't work anymore. And
That's
I
the
was like,
worst.
that's weird. Let me check this out. And I was like, oh, last week, government regulation went out that like totally nukes how like SMS works. And
That's a bummer. Damn
it's all right.
regulations.
But if I didn't procrastinate, I literally, because like I was on like chapter 8 at that point, like I probably would have, because it was when I was writing the rec chapter. Like I probably would have released the book, or it
Yeah.
would have been like farther along in production when I realized like, oh, Twilio doesn't work anymore. And so I had to adapt to it. But
That would have been a bummer though too if your book got out and then your project didn't work.
I don't know what I literally do not know what I would do in that. Like, I think it
You would
like,
have cried.
I mean, yeah, I would have like, oh, do you like release a second edition right away? Or like, do you fix it? Like, how do you fix a print?
Dang,
Like,
imagine if it went to the printers and everything.
yeah. And it could, like, it literally could have. So I just like,
dang.
I got lucky by procrastinating.
We might have gotten you a sale.
Okay.
Jamal, I started learning Elixir a few days ago as a Rubyist, looked to buy a book, but wanted a recent one. So he's very excited.
This is
this year. It's as recent
Yep.
as you can get really with hard copy books.
Yep.
So that's exciting. All right. So you leverage this around an SMS application. What do you learn throughout this project? What are the cool leverages? What do you teach? Do you teach gen servers?
Yeah. So the project is based around, so it's like, it's in order. So it's like, it goes from Ecto, Phoenix to Rec to Oben to some testing.
Okay.
It's like these 5 different aspects. And so each section of this is going to introduce that like sort of section of the application that's relevant to the framework being taught. So like you start with like, all right, let's like, how are we going to structure this SMS message in the database? How are we going to actually write some queries to like fetch the list of SMS messages to create a new SMS message? And then it's like, all right, now that we've done that, and some of it's like trust based of like, hey, would you write an application this way if you knew all the tools? Like obviously not, but you don't want to just like be like, here's all the tools at one time.
Yeah.
So then the next section is like, oh yeah, we have our sort of like our like query core. Let's go ahead and add like the web requests and some of the UI that are going into it. Oh, hey, we've now have a UI that talks to a database, but everything's fake. Let's go ahead and talk to an actual API. Because we couldn't use Twilio, I wrote like a Twilio compatible app in LiveView and Phoenix that you make requests against. And then it's like, okay, now that we now have like SMS messages sending, and I actually leave it open that you could send real Twilio messages as well. Let's go ahead and, like loop Open into this where we're going to be doing some like asynchronous tasks based on as we send these messages. All right, let's add some tests to it. So there is no gen server in the final project. And some of that's almost the point of the book of like because number one thing, I think the number one thing, maybe two, number 1 and 2 are like pattern matching and gen server and OTP, right? If you bring up Elixir to someone who doesn't quite know it, you have to be like, oh yeah, I've heard of this OTP thing and I don't really know what that is, or oh, I know Elixir is really good at pattern matching. And so pattern matching obviously really important, but I'm like, hey, OTP, like trust the tools a little bit, and like you can build real apps that are actually like valuable that don't loop it in, like you're not writing custom like processes.
You're not personally writing the gen server, but like using Oben, you're leveraging gen servers and processes. So
yep. And we sort of like in the Oben chapter, we sort of look at like, hey, let's say you were to do this with like a task, which is a loose form of like a process. And what is a process? It's a, not having to write a full gen server, but it's like, hey, let's like look at the evolution of this. And then we go to like the Oben route, and it's like, here you're focused on like the behavior. You don't have to think about like how it's actually going to run versus the other ones. You're thinking about how it has to run and are you writing things to a database, that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's super valuable, especially if someone picks up your book with the idea of wanting to build an MVP or their own product. It just gets them off the ground and gets them moving, and they'll have a very optimized performant app out of the box, just using the tools available.
Yep. I think if you use the tools available and you write like your first Elixir app, I think there's a 95% chance or higher that like, assuming it like does the stuff you want to do, like you're not going to have a lot of problems that you would have in other languages. It's like,
I agree.
And it's like, do I think that's because of Elixir? Not necessarily. I think a lot of it's because of the tools. A lot of it's because like the functional aspect, like there's other functional languages that people like because it removes classes of problems. And, so that also applies to Elixir.
Well, I mean, you get a lot out of the box with like the Beam VM and Erlang,
Yep.
right? Like
Yep.
that's such an important like bedrock to Elixir too.
Yeah, the scalability aspect is huge.
hmm
Is huge.
Well, what's nice too is you can have like a small startup, right? You can have a product out, and you don't even really have to worry about distribution, really. Like you can just kind of vertically scale your app and not worry about having nodes all over the world until you absolutely need to.
Yep. And but then it's also really easy to do that, right? So it's like
Right.
it's just
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, it's
I can't remember who I
yeah.
was talking to. No, dang it. See, I talked to too many people, but like it was a relatively big company, and maybe it was Fly. It might have been Fly
Okay.
IO, one of those guys, one of those engineers. But what they'll do is they pretty much just have like a server on like every major continent, and that's
Mhm.
it. And that's enough for serving the world. So they have like one in Asia, Europe, North America, and
Yep.
then you just scale your server vertically and you get away with a lot less.
And I use Fly now. I don't do global distribution yet, or like even like much distribution at all. The big reason is because if you're doing that, you really need to have your database in the same region. Like you have to.
Mm,
It's just
yeah, yeah.
you can't not do that. And I think that's actually a hard problem to solve. Is like how do you how do you have the right database that you need in every single region? So
That
I
is
don't solve it
difficult.
right now.
Yeah.
Like we do run on Fly mainly because easy to like it's easy to do all the stuff that goes into like launching an app. We have our databases in AWS and um uh but Fly makes it easy. I actually do like being hosted on Fly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we
I
don't do
mean,
the global stuff yet.
yeah, I think the past systems or like products are nice, the past platforms.
Mhm.
I'm always scared of them though. You always hear the nightmare stories. And I have a weird thing, like I just like to control my server. So I've just always been a Docker
Mm.
container, like DigitalOcean droplet guy.
Yeah. The reason I don't do that is because like with things like SOC 2 and these like security programs, it's like
hmm
you have to have like ways that you're like, how are you updating your servers? And like you have to like versus like when you go with the pass route, you honestly
That's
don't
true.
because
It's
you're
taken
like,
care
I
of.
mean, they're doing it for me.
Yeah.
So that's actually like one of the big things. But I would definitely get more perform like just be even though I'm like happy with Fly and like happy with like what we're doing, like I will get more performance by far out of like using like EC2 instances or like a DigitalOcean droplet versus the pass route.
Yeah.
It's just then I have I have the overhead of like managing it.
Yeah, you got to balance what
Yeah.
you're making time for. I unfortunately do DevOps way too often, and I'm not good at it.
Yeah. I'm passable, except then it's like I did my last company all in AWS, and I was just the only developer because it was like me and a co-founder, and
hmm
we never scaled the team. And then one day I realized when I was like leaving that, I was like, handing the keys over, and I realized that none of the stuff I set up would go to two users. Like in terms of like the AWS management aspect, I had to basically be
Yeah.
like, well, here's the account, like, and here like all my like I didn't do any of it right, and that made when I
Yeah.
was doing this startup because I probably would have done the same thing with like AWS because it did work well for us,
Yeah. Yeah.
but with this startup I was like I'm not going to do that again. So
Dude, I've been part of startups that are like too entwined in AWS, so I don't even like touching AWS anymore.
okay.
But like I get it. They have a lot of good stuff. I just don't want to be wrapped into Amazon's ecosystem.
Yeah, and that's why I only use tools that are what I would call uh standardized like open source tools like they're
Yeah.
all like RDS is I don't know that it's actually Postgres. I think it is actual Postgres, but it
hmm
is, it's Postgres. Versus, I'm not going to use like Aurora that's Postgres
Right.
compatible
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then you're even though you're Postgres compatible, you actually have like implicit dependencies on how they operate that you
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily be able to take it to somewhere else.
Yeah. And like I'm not against using things like,
Yeah,
using
yeah.
S3 bucket, like they're affordable for storage, right? So
Mhm.
I think those are good options.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a little PTSD because I remember, yeah, I was in the startup and like our CTO was leaving, like transitioning out, right? And he was like giving me a rundown of all the microservices intertwined into this iOS app. And like, it was like so much. I was like, dude, you need a degree in AWS microservices
Yeah.
just to deploy this thing. So yeah, I was like, dude, I like everyone says how much easier it is, but I almost think it's more complicated when you start tying in too many third
Oh, for
party
sure. For sure.
services. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I like to have everything just like we're still at the phase where it's like you can boot a server on the machine and you like have Super running. Right. And
Yeah.
there's like a little bit of like we do some like some of the real-time JavaScript stuff is like you have to run like the node real-time stuff because there's not anything in like the I forget what the stuff what the CDRTs are called, but there's like certain libraries where it's like it's only in the JavaScript ecosystem right now, like YJS I think is the one, and so it's like we have like some microservices, but our main like you can run our app on just one thing, and I've been in the world where it's like that's not true anymore. It's very very difficult.
Yeah. All right. What I think we can probably start wrapping this thing up, but what is your like favorite tooling in the Elixir ecosystem that like you wouldn't start a project without?
It's a good question. It's like probably a basic answer, but like I think I would only use Phoenix at this point. Like because I know a lot of people just use Plug or like I could do that myself, but it's like I like what it gives me. So I think everything I use would probably use Phoenix.
Yeah.
I think otherwise it's like it's sort of hard for me to say because it's like I would probably lean towards the stack we have now. It's like I like what we do with GraphQL. Like I like
Yeah.
that aspect of things. But I don't even think I think it's like it's I feel like it's almost like different with Elixir apps where it's like I don't necessarily have like go-to libraries. I sort of just like it's like I have tasks I'm trying to do, right? Where it's like, oh, I need to send some HTTP requests. And I'm like, all right, I'll use Rec for that. At this point, I actually historically I've used like HTTP Poison, but it's like, all right, I'll use Rec for that. Oh, I need jobs. All right, I'll use Open for that. Okay, I'm going to be doing a multi-tenant SaaS app. I'm going to use the library I wrote because I'm familiar with it and it does what I need. But it's like, it's more like whatever like the topic that I'm trying to solve is versus like necessarily like I have like a go-to like secret weapon or something like that.
Well, I think what's funny is like, well, you mentioned you'd use Phoenix, and I 100% agree because when I first started, I was like, oh, I'm just writing a back end. I'll just do everything in straight Elixir with Plug. Writing endpoints and things is so much easier when you involve Phoenix.
Yeah. Yep. And I've done like the pure Plug stuff before.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is easier with just
you'll get moving
Phoenix
a lot faster, especially like when I was first starting, I was also learning Elixir, so it was that hard learning curve. And then when I finally brought in Phoenix, I was like, my life is much simpler. But then I would say like tools I couldn't live without, Ecto, but we kind of have that out of the box. You don't even really think about it as a tool.
Yeah, I'm pulling up my mix file see if there's anything interesting that I forgot about. And I'm like looking at this, I'm like, yeah, sort of boring. I think like I do use distribution and I really like the like DNS cluster as like a library that solves that is like very nice. Because I've used other things in the past and I really like the like DNS cluster for that. Obviously I've talked about like GraphQL using Absinthe. I really like that. All right, I'll bring up a new one that's like I'm looking at my file here and I'm like, oh, what's an interesting library that people may not know about that is for a common problem? So for sending emails or like for creating emails that are going to be sent by the system, I really like this like MJML EEX library, which is basically I think it's like a Rust wrapper for this like this thing called MJML, which is a way of doing like email markup languages because emails are very I could not write an email from scratch and have it be correct. Like you have to do a lot of crazy stuff with like tables and stuff. And so with this, they basically give you almost like components that are like
Dude,
abstracted away, and you can write really good looking emails very easily with this
this is
MJML library.
amazing. You know, like this is perfect timing because I was just about to implement some emailing.
Yeah, so this is I think
Starred.
MJML EX. I'm trying to think of who it's. Alex wrote this library,
Alex,
so
yeah.
it's like
Alex is
uh,
awesome.
yeah, he's awesome, and this is like this was born from him like doing SaaS products, right? And like
Hmm.
he was like,
Yeah,
I want to have beautiful emails.
he has a SaaS platform for like automotive repair or body
Yep.
shop, which is really
Yeah,
cool.
body shop like body shop management, or like it's almost like it's like
Yeah.
the when you're doing the like act of like, you know, marking
Quoting
up a car
someone's
for
car. Yeah,
insurance.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Paint and
It's
all that
yeah,
type of stuff.
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's an awesome guy.
So that's probably my most interesting one that's in my that I would probably use anytime I need to do that. That is not in people's typical stack.
No, I
So
love that. I'm glad you brought it up. I feel like there's so many cool things in Elixir. It's almost hard to know them all. And I know people always complain
yeah.
that there aren't enough tools, but I think there
I
are.
very rare I at this point I very rarely have a problem that I can't solve. And there'll be like very specific things where it's like, all right, I'm using this YJ, like the client library I use for my real-time editor or for my text editor has real-time stuff built in, and it uses YJS. It's like you cannot use anything else. You like have to use YJS. And so it's like that's starting to become a thing in Elixir where people have like YJS compatible like libraries and data structures and whatnot. But it's like, you know, that one very specific use case, it's like, all right, I don't have a solution for that. But it's like pretty much any problem that's like that's not niched, there are good solutions for.
Hmm. We have a question. I'm not familiar with this library, but you might. I don't know. What are your thoughts about POW? And would
Uh-huh.
you recommend a straight Phoenix auth or POW
Yep.
directly?
So I was thinking about this and I decided not to say it. I would probably use POW. I use POW now.
Okay.
Um, I'm not sure how I feel. I would say I don't feel strongly about it, but I do feel less inclined to use something like Phoenix Auth than maybe the community at large is. Like the community at large seems excited by it, and I'm like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
awesome. I actually really like POW, and like I really like Devise as well in Ruby, right, which has its own reputation. And I use POW, and I even have customizations around it and stuff for like, you know, as you do as you build an app, you end up customizing stuff. And I've always been able to do the stuff I want to do, and um I feel like there are things that are handled for me that I don't have to think about that I know work well, like particularly on like the security of the system. And so that makes me like and recommend POW. And it's like I haven't had a bad experience with it, so I'm like, would I use it again? Probably, yeah.
I'm gonna have to check it out. And so Owen in here, he said take a look at web auth and components if you want to
Mm.
support passkeys. And then he goes shameless plug. So I'm guessing Owen wrote this library, and I'm checking it out. It looks really cool, honestly.
And especially, I know WebAuth is actually not easy to get started with. So it's like the fact that there's a WebAuth library for Elixir is like awesome,
Yeah,
right? It's like
very
because
cool.
that is not from what I hear on the street, that's not an easy protocol to get set up.
And Owen, you should DM me on X if you're on there, and let's get something set up so you can come on this podcast. That'd be fun. But this has been a lot of fun. Where can people find your book? Or books, I should say.
Books are on Pragprog. Is it yeah, pragprog.com. So typically, I mean, I just Google like from Ruby to Elixir or Real Time Phoenix. Real Time Phoenix is like a couple years old now, and it's like a little like it's actually not out of date because channels haven't changed dramatically. So it's actually still pretty relevant. And from Ruby to Elixir is you know within the last
Oh yeah,
6
it's
months.
brand
So
new.
that's pretty new.
When did Real Time in Phoenix come out?
That was like early 2020, I think.
Okay.
If I
So
recall.
the only differences would probably be the way the views are rendered, right? Like the
I think actually the biggest differences are like there used to be things that were automatically started for you, like the communication mechanism that Phoenix uses internally used to be started for you automatically, and now it's like you have to start it yourself. So it's like you have to put that in the application tree. But it's like from a code perspective, like all of the code around channels is actually exactly the same. Like that, the interfaces haven't changed at all. The way you write that code hasn't changed. It's like how you set up the app has changed a little bit, but not that much. So it's still very relevant. It's actually very relevant for live view because live view is built on channels, and also it's actually a book more about how you build real-time applications, less about like channels is the mechanism for that, less about like channels specifically.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, they're both on PragProg, and I mean, Google it, and that's how I always find it. Or you can go to like PragProg Elixir section, and there's always like if you're looking for the PDFs and you want a discount code, I think unfortunately the discount code is like promoting a platform, but it's like devtalk.com. That's the discount code. So they've managed to get a good discount code for themselves, but it's like all Prag books are like 35% off when you use that code.
That's
like
awesome.
And that's like at the most, and like a Black Friday event, you might get like 50% off or 40% off. Well, so always having a 35% off code is pretty good.
Yeah. Jamal just asked any coupon codes for Elixir Mentor. And no, I'm not cool enough. I'm going to have to try to get one. Elixir Mentor needs a discount code. But yeah.
Are you able? Is that a thing you're going to be doing, or?
I don't know. No.
Yeah. Black Friday discount.
Yeah, there we go.
You have a month to figure it
out. Well, anyways, thank you so much for joining me today, Steve. It was awesome chatting and hearing all about Supered and from Ruby to Elixir, which I do think is a great name. But everyone listening, it's just good if you're new to Elixir. So also support Steve. Check out that book. And I hope everyone has a good weekend. And any last comments before we sign off, Steve?
I don't think so. I appreciate you having me and enjoyed the convo.
All right, cool. All right, see you guys. Have a good weekend.
Testing.